council agreed, but they attached a condition to their agreement. We want you to pay $10,000 in order to compensate us for the cost of destroying the cemetery. Rabbi Besser and I went to see the Slovakian ambassador to the United Nations, Dr. Peter Tonka, an international lawyer by profession who now sits on the International Court of Justice. We related to him our tale. We pulled at his heartstrings, and he responded, describing the City Council's demand as, quote, immoral, unquote. And he worked over the next few weeks and ensured that the demand was rescinded. Dvorim hayotzim and halev nichnosim lelev. We do not, however, rely on the language of diplomacy, no matter how beautiful our explanations may be, no matter how heartfelt, no matter how moving. At the end of the day, we are dealing with hardened politicians, people who do not share our interests, people who do not share our sensitivities. So many of them in Eastern European countries are former communist officials who all their lives grew up under and as part of the communist regimes. They have not suddenly had a change of heart with the fall of communism. During that meeting with the Foreign Minister of Ukraine, the Foreign Minister himself, Gennady Udovenko, who later became President of the General Assembly of the United Nations and remembered us fondly when we met him, when he was there, he opened the meeting, and it was a very impressive opening statement. The substance of it may be summed up in this way. The communists inflicted terrible damage on our national psyche, and we have not yet recovered. I sat directly opposite him and was very impressed by his candid analysis of what had happened in Ukraine and what the communist regime had done to that country's population. And as I was concentrating on his words and reflecting on them, I stopped myself and I thought, just a moment, what were you doing during the communist regime? The communist regime had ended 5 years earlier in 1991. This was 1996. What were you doing? I thought to myself, and I knew the answer to the question. During the communist regime, Gennady Udovenko, the then foreign minister, had been Ukraine's ambassador to the United Nations. The man sitting opposite us on his right, Zelenko, Alexander Zelenko, had, under the communists, been the foreign minister. They had simply traded places. These were two hardened communists. And here was the former communist, now supposedly free foreign minister of Ukraine, telling us that the communists had inflicted terrible damage on the national psyche and that the people had not yet recovered. One of the little ironies of history. The point is that we cannot expect these people to suddenly have been capable of relating to our sensitivities and our interests. Old habits die hard, especially when you look at the leadership of those countries today. The point is that self-interest rules. They are interested at heart in what's in it for them, and therefore we have to cater to those interests, and we have to develop a system of sophisticated linkage. And linkage in this sense means identifying their interests, what is important to them, matching their interests to our interests so that it becomes in their interest to cater to our sensitivities. Let me take 3 examples. countries such as Ukraine and other countries in the former Soviet Union are working mightily to build up their economies following the fall of the communist era. One of the things that helps them build up their economies is foreign currency. It therefore becomes particularly important to those countries to develop tourism industries, because tourists bring in foreign currency, and it's important. We say to these countries, maintain and preserve our cemeteries, maintain and preserve our synagogues, the other examples of Jewish culture and religion in your countries. We will send you tourists. Jews are tourists. Jews go to Kivrei Ovos. Jews go to the burial sites of their ancestors. Jews go to Kivrei Tzadikim. Jews go to the burial sites of the great luminaries of our religious tradition. If you preserve our cemeteries, we will send you tourists. And we point to the example of Poland. Poland has built a whole tourist industry based on Jewish cemeteries. You only have to open Jewish papers, particularly those in New York, to see the regular announcements and advertisements for tours with chartered planes coming to Poland, to Ukraine and other countries in order to observe the yard sites of our great tzaddikim. Poland is the prime example. When we met with Udovenko, he was acutely conscious that 2.5 weeks earlier, around Rosh Hashanah, some 10,000 Breslov Hasidim had descended on the town of Uman to spend Rosh Hashanah near the kever of Reb Nachman Breslov. That's worth a fortune to them. At that time, the Ukrainian government had a special arrangement with the Breslov Hasidim. They charged $10 a head for visas. That was $100,000 right there. That's a lot of money in Ukraine. They tried at one stage to increase that to $200 a head, but the Jewish community united and made it clear to them, Loyal capital Aleph, and they went back to their $10 a head. On top of that, we had stories coming out of Uman about simple peasants renting out their apartments for the few days and earning enough income to enable them to live for a whole year. Jews are tourists. It's a way in which we match our interests to theirs. So it becomes in their interests to cater to our sensitivities. Another example, public relations. Countries in the former Soviet Union are desperate for good publicity. Again, let me take the example of Ukraine, simply because it's most pronounced. There was a reception at the Ukrainian mission to the United Nations for a later foreign minister after Udovenko, when Udovenko became president of the General Assembly of the United Nations, and I was invited along. And the then ambassador of Ukraine to the United Nations, Volodymyr Yelchenko, with whom I became personally very, very friendly, introduced me to the foreign minister, and we were talking about the image of Ukraine in the world, and particularly in the United States. The ambassador said to me the following words. He said, "The New York Times has never published a good word about Ukraine. Every time you open a paper and see something about Ukraine, it's either the president being involved in a murder plot, or bribery, or corruption, or other scandals, or all of the above. It's very difficult to find something good about Ukraine. And in Yiddish terms, they're chalashim for good publicity. So what do? We can cater to that. If a country such as Ukraine does something good, we can make sure that it is publicized. For instance, in May of 1996, I saw that there was a serious problem of a number of different major cemeteries in Ukraine being desecrated. And every time something happened, we would all run around like chickens without heads, sending faxes and making phone calls and making representations. And it was going on often 24 hours a day. I suggested in a letter to the Ukrainian ambassador to the United Nations, let us try and solve the problem globally. It's not in your interest and it's not in our interest to have these scandals taking place with great regularity. And I said, let's work towards national legislation which will once and for all proclaim the sanctity and inviolability of cemeteries and ensure that they are protected and preserved for posterity. We worked quietly, behind the scenes, deliberately, over a period of 2 years. And in July of 1998, on a Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock, while preparing for Shabbos in my home in New York, in Brooklyn, I got a phone call from the State Department. And I was told, Harry, the Prime Minister of Ukraine has on his desk an order, an executive order of the Cabinet of Ministers, prohibiting construction on cemeteries, prohibiting the sale and privatization of cemeteries. The Prime Minister is going to sign it, and next Wednesday it's going to be handed to Vice President Gore in Kiev. It was a major success. It was a major accomplishment, and it was a major act by the Ukrainian cabinet. We ensured that publicity was radiated out all over the Jewish world. There were stories in many major Jewish newspapers of all sorts. I collected these and put them into the form of a dossier. And over lunch at a kosher Chinese restaurant in New York, I handed this dossier to the Ukrainian ambassador to the United Nations, the very same one who had said, the New York Times has never written a good word about Ukraine. He was thrilled. The point and the message that we conveyed was, it's worthwhile catering to our interests, to Jewish interests, because we are makir toiv. We record our appreciation and our gratitude, and we do the right thing by them. It's another means of catering to their interests so that our interests and their interests become identical. Let's take a third example. I keep coming back to Ukraine because it's the best example. There are examples from a whole lot of other countries. I was at a reception which was a farewell for Consul General Krishanevsky. As I was leaving, Yelchenko, the ambassador, said to me, Harry, I have to talk to you. I said, what's the problem? He said, we are candidates for a seat on the Security Council of the United Nations. I want to get Israel's vote. I can't get an appointment with Dori Dol, the ambassador. Can you help me? I said, sure, not having a clue what I was going to do. He said, no problem. I discussed it with Rabbi Haskell Besser, and we hatched the following plan. On Monday, I called Rabbi Menachem Porush, a legendary figure in Israeli politics, long-standing former member of the Knesset, with phenomenal contacts everywhere. He is now into his 90s. His mind works grease lightning. I should be able to think that clearly at 60 as he thinks at 92. He understood exactly what I was saying. I pointed out to him that we had developed excellent relations with Ukraine, and it was in our interest to have Ukraine represented on the Security Council and to support Ukraine and to let them see that we were supporting the country. He was so quick to grasp what I was talking about, he cut me off in the middle of my presentation, and he said, write me a letter quickly and fax it to me. But don't fax it to me to the office because I won't get it till tomorrow morning. Here's my home fax number. I prepared the letter, which explained to him why it was important to us to have Ukraine elected and why it was important for Ukraine to have Israel's vote. And I faxed it off to him at his home. That was Monday night, Israel time. Tuesday morning, he himself wrote a letter to the then Foreign Minister of Israel, David Levin, on his personal stationery, enclosed my letter, and had it hand-delivered to the Foreign Minister himself. That was Tuesday. The next morning, Wednesday, I called Ambassador Dori Gold. The moment I introduced myself, he wouldn't let me continue. He said, I got a fax from Israel this morning instructing me to vote for Ukraine.